Hello, my friends from Rocky Mountain Zen. Um, that also means friends from Sozen's Temple, Angel City Zen Center, and Thousand Harbours Temple, Mountain Rain Zen, Calgary Soto Zen. Anyway, um, yeah, it's been a little while since I updated the message, so I'm sharing something that I heard from. Well, I didn't hear. I translated for Akiba Roshi as he delivered his Teisho or Dharma talk on the founder of Soto Zen School, Don Lianze, um, and his conversation with his teacher, Yanam. He first of all shared with us a little bit of a basic background of what we call koan, Zen, sort of a question, riddles, tales, and at how it sort of started to come out as be introduced to the Chinese people back then as a way to introduce them to a deeper understanding of Zen and Buddhist teachings with all the tales and stories. So his point was that it was not something that's intentionally designed to make things complicated. Although it does sound like, according to him, the Dongshan Lianze, as time, he kind of made it sound a little more complicated. And I understand for a lot of Western Zen practitioners and teachers, koan and Zen practice of non-duality is intellectually challenging. So it kind of pushes us to go even deeper. My personal take always is that the practice of Zen involves in a great deal the working that's beyond what consciousness, what we can recognize. It's kind of like trying to work with some organs of the body which we can't technically control, like heartbeat, and yet that's the kind of a depth of the mind, and depth of how we relate to the rest of the world. And that's a bit of a interesting thing about the Zen practice. Anyway, the question was that there's a portrait back then that only one student among many, if there are many, who receive after the teacher passes away, and with the kind of will left. So with the portrait and will. And the way they call this thing was shin. I don't know how it was pronounced back then, but shin means true, truth, or true. Is that the teacher, the portrait is showing you. Don Lianze's story goes back, of course. His story of awakening happens after he leaves Yan'an and then see his own reflection on the surface of the river. In Hokkyo Zanmai, the Precious Mirror Samadhi, there's this particular line: "You're not it, but in truth, it is you." As he looks at his own reflection on the surface of the water, he ponders, is that reflection me or not? Then what Akiba Roshi was sharing was that for that reflection, from, let's say, that reflection's looking at this, is that the same or is it different? You're not it, but in truth, it is you. Nanji kore kare ni arasu. Kare masani kore nanji. When I was a child, or even a teenager chanting this sutra, I had no idea what it meant. Oh, even didn't think about exploring its meaning. Even weren't aware that this whole sutra comes from Danshan, one of the founders of Soto Zen school. That is how I suppose we identify ourselves. That's how we relate ourselves to others, or identify others with ourselves. One thing I always realize as I translate for my boss, the director, that he always tried to encourage us to go back to the Eightfold Path. Eightfold Path, Four Noble Truths. That's the core of the Buddhist teaching, and that's something Japanese American community, Japanese Canadian communities, as well as all other sanghas and Zen centers, and needless to say, sanghas across the world, like literally the three treasures of Buddha, Dharma, Sangha in all 10 directions of all times, past, present, future, share. An Eightfold Path, I get that. Like his point was always, the way I sense it is, do not end up dwelling on that intellectual model. It does involve all sort of wholesome practice, work, including samu, the work practice, chanting, zazen, and an Eightfold Path, talk about Shila, dhyana. The moralities, wisdom, patience. And patience, I guess, sometimes often emphasized. But patience also gets to be a little bit misunderstood. Some people translate that, use the word constancy. Constancy. This is a kind of a realm, the field of practice, where likes and dislikes, preferences, sort of cease. One more aspect, I guess I wanted to share through this particular Dharma combat that we did for Dave, and technically for everyone, was to gather up, to round up all these people of Soto Zen traditions in Japan, US and Canada. And one question we get caught up often is what we call nyoho. Is it in accordance with Dharma? Is it not in accordance with Dharma? As a jargon in the monastery, there's a word called funyo. So non-accordance with Dharma. It's kind of funny. If there's an instant cup noodle, and we call that food of that's not in accordance with Dharma, it's out there. And that's always a challenge, especially if you're a truly dedicated practitioner and teacher, when you meet the situations where, meeting eating culture is one thing. It's kind of obvious. Or things that you consider as funyo, that's not in accordance with what I learned from the teachers, or the principle of the school. And here we are in the Zen world. Do not get caught up with the preferences and likes and dislikes. How do we deal with this gap? Because there are situations where we feel quite uncomfortable with the way the practice unfolds, or some Sangha members or some teachers do certain things. And to me, that's really where the practice unfolds. I feel like that's why we, instead of dwelling in our own space, in a room, maybe if it's not your own room, you're kind of secluding yourself. It's a Sangha space that everybody thinks the same way. I think it's good to have the community where you feel quite at home, where everybody thinks likewise. But instead of, right, so that's there. It has to be. And so good that we have so many different variations of Sanghas. And yet, the culture of our school encourages us to mingle, meet others. I feel it's like also true with anything else, everything else. In kids going to school, meet the kids who grew up in a different family background. Or for us going to different countries, learn people of different cultures. It's painful. It's not beautiful always. Well, if any, actually, it's often not quite beautiful, because that beauty is our own mental construct. And that's what the school encourages us to explore. Letting go, letting go. Yeah, it's the first thing we hear when you hear about Buddhism. And yet, that's the last thing we can seem to actually pull off. It's always like that. You're not it, but in truth it is you. Ocean has water. The nature of the ocean, and we are that dewdrop of water. You don't want to deceive yourself. You don't want to fool yourself that with that whole universe. We have this absolute individual value, the way we are born, raised, educated, surrounded by all these cultural conditions, languages, the way we are has absolute value. And because of this, that person over there who was born, raised, educated in a different system has their own absolute value. Regardless of whether you agree with it or not, regardless of your preferences, whether your culture behind you affirms it or not. We typically don't try to change that culture because we say we don't need to. Our own inter-origination, the very nature of the inter-origination of all phenomena is already there. It's already kicked in. And you see that. Maybe you don't see that, but it is happening. And this thing we can say about the relationship between the Western Zen communities and Japanese Zen communities. The moment it touches each other, it happens. It takes courage. It takes entrusting the unknown, just like part of the package of the Zen practice, which you probably know if you know. And yet, it's unfolding. So don't worry about what you recognize. although I understand fully that we want to recognize. And that also, I feel it's really fair. But nevertheless, don't worry about it. Engage in the practice. Continue. And it's there. All right. Sorry, it's all my mumbling. I should probably write up something next time. So I'll just share this as it is. I always thank you so much for your friendship. And in May this year, 2024, marks the 10th anniversary of my U.S. mission, North American mission. And so I am fully still committed to Soto Zen in U.S. I have my own personal time frame after the lapse of 10 years that I will, no matter what, will start shifting the focus gradually toward Canada so that I can dedicate the remaining 10 or 20 years, maybe more, maybe less, who knows, the remaining time of my life to fully to Canadian Sanghas. And I'm hoping that there'll be more Japanese friends, more American friends who would be more enthusiastic about the mission or sharing the Dharma in Canada, because we need more people. It's such a wide country. And yeah, again, thank you. And I hope you will enjoy the season as it gets warmer and the snow melts. Looking forward to the next visit.